Flying a mile high, it's Joe Madison, the Black Eagle.
And we do have a hot mic and a hot guest, Michael D. Brown, Shadow Senator. Good to see you again. It's well, we see each other from time to time at different events.
Because you're such a great activist. You're always out there, and it's such an honor to be here with you.
I'm glad you came in. Yeah, I really am. You know, let's and I know we're going to get to this. There's a fundraiser, the play about our friend Dick Gregory. It's here in Washington, D.C. at the Arena Stage, titled Turn Me Loose. But I thought before we get to that, and we'll make sure all this gets on our Facebook too, Senator Brown, let's start with this whole term for a whole new group of people out here nationwide that may not know. What is a shadow senator?
Well, you know, this started many years ago, 1796, Joe, in Tennessee. They elected 2 senators. They sent them to Washington. They wanted to be a state. They were a territory at the time. The senators lobbied for statehood, and Tennessee became a state. So several other places have done the same thing. California had shadow senators. Oregon had shadow senators. Alaska had shadow senators. 6 territories actually have used shadow senators to get statehood for their territories. Now, when the District of Columbia had a constitutional convention back in the 1980s, they decided to do the same thing, and they elected the first shadow senators were Jesse Jackson, and Florence Pendleton, and they were elected in 1991. So we've had shadow senators here since 1991.
What is the responsibility of a shadow senator?
It's actually to lobby Congress. The mandate that created our office says to lobby, to let Congress know that we're ready for statehood, that we want statehood, to lobby for statehood, and to keep the District of Columbia and the elected officials in the District of Columbia advised of our progress.
And when were you elected as a shadow senator?
I was first elected in 2006. So I've been doing this for 12 years. I'm now running for my third 6-year term.
Does a shadow senator, are you the only shadow senator?
No, there's 2 of us.
There's 2 of you.
Yes.
And the second one is
Paul Strauss, who actually was elected after the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Now, do shadow senators, do you have an office? Do you have a staff? Do you get paid?
We have an office, but it's in City Hall. It's not in the Capitol.
Okay.
We have a staff, a paid staff, but no, we do not get paid. The senators themselves don't get paid.
Is that right?
Yes.
And how big is your staff?
Well, I have 2 people. I have one full-time person and one part-time person.
I got you. Okay, and that's by statute, I take it. Is that correct?
Well, no, it's actually just happened. For the first 8 years I was a senator, I had no staff. I had to pay for all my own expenses. I had to pay for anything I used, any travel I did. But 4 or 5 years ago, they started to allocate money for our office.
So what is a typical day like for you, a senator? And the appropriate title would be senator.
Yes.
I don't have to say shadow senator.
No,
Brown.
that's actually a nickname. And it's based on the idea in England that, you have senators, you have representatives in waiting.
Okay,
and that's
I
what
got
we're
you.
supposed
All right.
to be. Yes.
So what is a typical day for a shadow senator representing the District of Columbia?
Well, we try to do whatever we can to get the word out about statehood, and
like doing this show, other shows.
And I have I have a talk show on the internet that's been there for 4 years now. We get about 400,000 hits a year on the internet. So we do that, and we prepare for the show. But I also lobby on Capitol Hill. In the last 6 weeks, I've gone to 7 congressional offices, both in the House and the Senate, of Republicans, because the good news about statehood for the District of Columbia is that we have 195 co-sponsors on a statehood bill, 166 in the House and 29 in the Senate. But the bad news is every one of them's a Democrat. So we're trying to get Republicans on the bill because we see bipartisanship as essential to making this happen.
But let's be honest, Republicans have a problem.
Yes.
And I have always heard, and it's what is it, the 3 2s or
Yeah.
the 4? What? And to
Walter
explain to
Fauntleroy,
people, he
our
coined that.
second delegate.
Yeah.
We had a guy named Norm Chipman, like way back. But then in modern history, of course, Reverend Fauntleroy was our first delegate, and he used to say there were the 4 2s that kept us back, and we were too urban, we were too liberal, we were too Democrat, and we were too black.
Right.
And those were the 4 2s that worked against us.
Yeah, that worked against it. So that would require. There's been other solutions that have been brought up too, haven't there?
Yes.
And that is that the District of Columbia is put together from part of Virginia.
Yep.
Explain that history, and part of Maryland.
Yes, the 2 parts of the district, it was 10 miles square, and if you've seen a map of the district, you know it's not square. It's more of like a strange triangular-looking thing, and that's because the land that was ceded by Maryland and Virginia, we gave the Virginia part back to Virginia in the 1860s because they were afraid that we were going to end slavery, and there was very powerful forces in that part of the city that wanted, or in Virginia rather, that wanted that part back. So we ceded it back to Virginia. And in fact, we were the first people to end slavery.
Yeah.
You know, we celebrate Emancipation Day
A year before.
nine months before
Lincoln signed the proclamation.
Yeah.
Right.
He bought all the slaves. In fact,
Yeah, that's right.
It's the only compensated emancipation in the history of the world.
In other words, those folks who had to give up their slaves got compensated for every slave they gave up.
And it's amazing if you look at the records how they got compensated.
How did they get compensated?
Well, a young man might have gotten $1,000 if they had a young man, but if it was a middle-aged woman that was past childbearing age, they got $50. I mean, it was really strange and really, there was a great person that's kept the records of all this, and we celebrated on Emancipation Day, and it's just horrible.
So is it the 4 2s that, and that's TOO? Is that still a factor now, or what is the biggest drawback now?
The biggest factor in the 4 2s is too Democrat. We voted 94% for Hillary Clinton. We have no elected officials in the District of Columbia who are Republican. We've never voted for a Republican for president in the District of Columbia, even though we've only had the right to vote for president since the 1960s. We've always voted for Democrat. First guy I ever worked for, Jimmy Carter, won Georgia and Washington, D.C., when he was running for re-election. So that's our problem with the Republicans. They see 2 Democratic senators in perpetuity if we get statehood, and they're against that. And this has always been the argument about statehood. They said, strangely enough, that Alaska would never elect a Republican and Hawaii would never elect a Democrat. And if when they were trying to become states, and now you see that I don't think there's an elected Republican in Hawaii, and there's only one Democrat in Alaska.
Yeah.
So those things change over time.
Right.
But it's always been a partisan battle, and we've done things to try to overcome that, based on the Missouri plan where they let slave states and non-slave states come into the Union together. Several years ago, a Republican from Virginia tried to pair us with Utah to get a vote for our delegate in
No, what do you mean paired you? What does that mean? What are you talking about?
Utah felt that they were cheated out of a representative because when they did the census, they didn't include Mormon missionaries who were out on missions. Now, if you're in the service and your home is Washington, D.C., but you're stationed in Georgia, the census considers you a resident of Washington.
Right.
So Utah went to court over this, and they lost. So Utah is singly the most Republican jurisdiction in America, and Washington, D.C. is the most Democratic. So this congressman from Virginia came up with the idea of giving another representative to Utah and giving Eleanor Holmes Norton a vote.
A full
vote, and that way we would come in together. And it almost made it. I mean, it passed the House and it passed the Senate, but it passed at different times.
Now, you bring up Eleanor Holmes Norton, and people may not across the country understand what voting power does she or does she not have, Senator Brown?
She doesn't have the all-important floor vote. So she can vote. Her vote is really ceremonial. She can vote in committee.
Okay.
She can act like a representative in every instance. But if her vote in committee causes a tie to break, it doesn't count.
Really?
Yes. So she lacks the final power that every representative has, and that's a vote. And of course, you know how it goes on Capitol Hill, Joe. It's all about trading and negotiating with each other, and she has very little to negotiate with. And given the job she's done, it's amazing to see her up close because she's accomplished many things.
And because she really has to get other members of Congress to agree with her when we want certain things, now this is and we're talking with Michael D. Brown, who is a shadow senator for the District of Columbia, receives no pay from government, no budget.
Yeah, very little budget.
Very little budget. Cannot vote on matters in the Senate. Yep. So basically lobbying to get. So let's get to this issue before our first break. And that is, why should Washington, D.C. be a state?
Well, because, to put it as simply as I can, to be equal in the United States of America, you need to be one of the states. And if you are a state, then you come in on equal footing with all other states. So most Americans don't know that we not only don't have representation in either house, but we don't have control over our own tax money.
Now, explain how that works.
Yeah.
So you have a city council.
Right,
you have
council.
A mayor.
Yep.
You debate and you vote on a budget.
Yep.
But then what happens when the city council and the mayor put that budget, they have to do what? Send it to Congress?
They have to send it to Congress. As crazy as this is, they have to send it to Congress, and Congress gets to approve it, and then the president has to sign it into law. The president signs two budgets. He signs the national budget, and he signs the budget of the District of Columbia.
And if he doesn't like what's in the budget for the District of Columbia, if the Congress doesn't like what's in the budget for the District of Columbia, that the city council that's voted by the citizens and the mayor, can they change it?
Yeah, they take it out, and this happens all the time. And one of the clearest, most terrible examples of this is that we had a needle exchange program in our budget for years because we were told by the Center for Disease Control that was one of the best ways to stem the rise in new AIDS cases.
HIV cases.
HIV cases.
Right.
Well, they took it out of our budget every year for 10 years. It was our own money. We didn't ask for federal money to implement this program. We used local money. But every year for 10 years, Congress took it out of our budget. And it wasn't until the District of Columbia became the number one place in America with new HIV cases that they allowed us to keep it in the budget. And they still put restrictions on it, even though it's in the budget.
And what committee pretty much looks at the budget initially?
Well, there's a government affairs committee
Okay.
that really, there used to be a district committee.
Right.
And it was a very strange thing because there were a lot of Southern Republicans on that committee that didn't like the District of Columbia. Mm-hmm. Some of our neighbors were on that committee. Nancy Pelosi's father, who was a member of Congress, was from Maryland, was on that committee. Which, when you think about it, imagine having your neighbors next door decide what you can do with your property, what you can do, and that's the kind of thing we put up with for years.
And the other thing,
but any congressman can interfere with the district.
Any congressman. I also think about too, in a lot of states. I've lived in New York. I've lived in Philadelphia. I've lived in St. Louis. I'm trying to think of other places I've lived, but I know that you have in many of these states commuter taxes.
Yes.
Now, and I have to take a break. So how many people commute from neighboring states, Virginia, Maryland primarily, into the District of Columbia.
65% of the people that are in the city now, right at this moment, are from outside the District of Columbia. So 35% of us pay for everything in the district because we're not allowed to tax income at its source, or what you're calling a commuter tax.
Right.
And DC Appleseed, which is a nonprofit in DC, estimates that we lose over $2 billion a year that way.
Because we can't.
Even the simplest things. You know, when the president leaves the White House,
yes,
there's always DC cops with him.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you have to effectuate an arrest, right, they have to have jurisdiction.
DC cops, DC fire, DC ambulance.
We pay for all that.
We pay for all of it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take a break. So let me ask you: does the president's he gets the #1 tag?
Yeah.
Does it have taxation without
representation?
representation?
One does.
This one
and
does.
We've struggled at times. It took a while to get President Obama to put the tags on.
Let me tell you, I had to. I mean, I sat in the White House.
Yeah.
Because we used to have these. I don't know what they were. He'd asked us to come in. Am I doing this right? Doing that right? And I said, I've been asked by people like yourself and Mark Plock.
Yes.
Who's a commentator, and I said, I've been asked, Mr. President, when are you going to put the taxation without representation on your car, on your limo? And he said, well, why would I? I said, well, if nothing more, it's for symbolism.
Yes.
And he said, Joe, I don't do symbolism. I said, Mr. President, you are a symbol.
Absolutely.
You are.
Absolutely.
And guess what? He didn't do it right away, but he eventually did.
And Clinton did it right away. I mean, some of them haven't, some of them haven't.
Yeah.
And
but I imagine that maybe Trump just hasn't focused on it.
Well,
let's hope.
President Obama was a symbol, and every day he gets to be a greater symbol.
Right. Let's take
a
break. Let me do this. I will open up the lines if you would like to get if you have questions. The reason I'm doing this is because most people across the country, number one, they didn't know that the District of Columbia isn't a state. Right. Number two. They don't know what a shadow senator does. Number three, they want to, and we'll get to one of the reasons why it should be, and how much we pay in federal taxes, the folks we send off to war, the whole 9 yards. My guest is the shadow senator, and he's here doing what he got elected to do, and that's to lobby for D.C. to become the 51st state. Yes. Right after this, our phone number, 1-866-801-8255. Hey, follow me, the Black Eagle, on Twitter at Madison, SiriusXM, and Facebook at Joe Madison, the Black Eagle.
Flying a mile high, it's Joe Madison, the Black Eagle.
All right. And I am Madison here, and Michael D. Brown is the shadow senator from the District of Columbia, and so I will tell those of you who are online, on air, we're not going to be taking these calls, so I appreciate you, and because I'm going to finish this segment with my guests, so we might let them know, and we can. And by the way, Robert and Crystal, if you get a chance, call tomorrow. And we'll take your calls. We won't hold it against you, but I want to make sure my guest has plenty of time to talk about the impact. So, and if you have questions in reference to statehood, Washington D.C., lines are open. 1-866-801-8255. So, let's talk about when you're lobbying members of Congress. Why do we deserve it? Let's talk about how many citizens there are, federal taxes. A lot of people may not know, we have all of these federal buildings, what's the relationship when it comes to taxing them? Well, the whole 9 yards. How many people, men and women, do we send off to war? I mean,
we serve at higher than the national average.
I'm sorry, what does that?
We serve in the military at higher than the national average.
All right.
We lost more people per capita during the Vietnam War than any state. We have 39 Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. You know, I said when I testified before the United States Senate that our national anthem was written by a Washington soldier, Francis Scott Key, and TAPS was written by a Washington soldier, General Butterworth, who was a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient during the Civil War. So every time the flag goes up and the flag comes down, a Washingtonian's involved. But when it flies overhead, they forget about us. And that really is the basic problem. The country was founded on the principle that you cannot tax people and then not give them a voice in their own government. We pay the highest per capita taxes of any jurisdiction in America. And we serve it higher than the national average. We do everything that's required to be good citizens. But then in the end, we're denied the basic civil rights that every citizen
Does
should
the
have.
federal government pay property taxes on the buildings they have on Constitution in Pennsylvania?
No. Imagine what the property taxes on the Department of Agriculture would be, which takes up all that land.
So the all the various departments, the Department of Agriculture, the Treasury Department, the IRS, the White House, the FBI, they do not pay local taxes.
No, they don't. And at one time, we got a payment from the federal government in an attempt to try to compensate us somewhat for that. But we don't get that anymore.
You don't get that,
no,
that?
We don't even get that. We don't get any more than you would get if you were any other jurisdiction in America. I mean, we get Medicaid and things like that.
So why was the District of Columbia created in the first place?
Well, it was created. What happened was when the capital was in Philadelphia. You know, at one time the capital changed from different places. It was in Annapolis,
New York,
and Philadelphia. Well, it was in Philadelphia. A bunch of veterans from the Revolution surrounded Carpenter's Hall, which is where Congress met, and they demanded to be paid. They hadn't been paid. So Congress snuck out the back door and snuck off to New Jersey. And when they came to Washington, D.C., Madison, no relation, I assume.
No.
Said...
I've already checked that out, by the way.
Okay.
Yes. Right.
Madison said we must be in control of the jurisdiction which we inhabit because we can't let a state hold us hostage. What they did in Pennsylvania was they called the governor and asked him to call out the militia, and the governor said, no. I'm not calling out soldiers on people that I need to vote for me who are also soldiers. So they said we can't have a state in control of what the federal government does. And, you know, in those days, they weren't sure whether the federal government would be strong or not. So there's a thing in the Constitution called the district, which we call the District Clause, that says that Congress shall have exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over a jurisdiction not to exceed 10 miles square. And that's the important thing for us. We get around the Constitution in our plan for statehood by shrinking the size of the District of Columbia, by shrinking the National Capital Service Area to those areas that have federal buildings. So the White House, Congress, all that area. And the rest becomes a new state.
How many citizens of the District of Columbia?
700,000.
And growing.
And growing. And we're already bigger than two states, and Vermont and West Virginia. And
population-wise.
Population-wise. And at one time, when the district was 850,000 people, we were bigger than 4 states. We have a budget that's bigger than I think we pay more federal taxes than 9 other states. So we're big enough. We deserve this, and it really is the most fundamental principles of democracy that we've been represented. You know, we're the only country in the world that does this. 11 countries have copied our Constitution, and they've all taken out that clause which takes away the rights of the people.
So, in other words, where the national capital is because that I heard someone mention this the other day. The only country where people who live in their capital don't have representation.
Right.
With only one.
Yep, only one. And it just like I say, it flies in the face of every fundamental principle of democracy. If they draft my son, I've got nobody to stand up and speak for me or for him. When we spend our tax money, we're subjected.
Yeah.
I call us the national teenager. We have the credit card, but we have to call home and see if we can use it.
Yeah, I mean, I always seem to get a good response when I say, "Can you imagine?" Let's say I lived in Detroit. Can you imagine the city council and the mayor of Detroit passing their budget and then saying, "Wait a minute, we have to send it to Congress to get it approved"?
And
They would, and only have two. I only have 2 minutes left, so let me get to this arena stage.
Yes,
and the efforts that the fundraiser there. Our good friend Dick Gregory.
Yes, we found out that they were doing a play on the life of Dick Gregory.
Turn Me Loose.
Turn Me Loose is the name of the play. We bought a big section of the orchestra section of the theater on his birthday, on what would be his 86th birthday, October 12th. And we're going to do a fundraiser for a nonprofit that's been founded to get the word out about statehood.
Okay, good. So what date will this be now?
October 12th.
Okay, that would be Dick's 86th birthday, and it'll be at Arena Stage.
Arena Stage. You get to see the play. You get a great seat, and then afterwards we're going to have a reception with family and friends and other people. We hope that you'll come.
Yeah, I plan to
Joe,
be there.
And
I've got a heavy commute. I live right across the street.
Well, there you go. We're welcome to send somebody over to get you. And it's going to be a great play, and it's been produced in cooperation with the Will and Jada Smith Foundation and John Legend. There's a lot of important people involved in the production of this. And you knew Dick Gregory so well. We just thought it would be a win-win.
Well, let me tell you, it is. And we'll put this on our Facebook. So people in the area, I have 30 seconds, Senator Brown. But the play is about Dick Gregory's turn, and I understand this actor. It's a one-man play.
Yes.
They tell me he is like a reincarnation of Dick Gregory.
Well, they said, the New York Times.
Yeah.
The New York Times has called it scorchingly funny and brilliant. Takes your breath away.
So
you go to statehood.org if you want to get a ticket.
We'll put
statehoodnow.org.
Got it.
Yeah.
We'll put it. All right. Thank you for coming in.
No, thank you, Mr. Madison. We really appreciate it.